George Harrison has always struggled with his fame.
Your hair looks great.
Although he says he loathes being in the public eye, he has emerged from a self-imposed exile to promote his first album in 5 years.
George Harrison's journey as a songwriter was never smooth. Within the Beatles, he spent years fighting to be heard, overshadowed by the dominant creative partnership of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. By the time Don't Bother Me appeared on With the Beatles in 1963, the group had already secured their position as the most influential band of the decade.
I love them. I don't care what anybody thinks. I love the Beatles for them, and I'll always love them. Even when I'm 105 and an old grandmother, I'll love them. And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrienne from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart.
Riding high on the success of From Me to You and She Loves You. His early efforts were often seen as album fillers rather than standout contributions, and despite refining his songwriting craft across albums like Help and Rubber Soul, he still had to push hard to get his material recorded.
Like in the Beatles, I was the one who kept quiet and at the back and let the other egos be at the front.
That struggle for recognition paid off in the final years of the band. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Here Comes the Sun, and Something were unmistakable highlights, the latter even earning praise from Frank Sinatra, who called it the greatest love song of the past 50 years. But by then, Harrison had stockpiled so many rejected compositions that he had an entire backlog of material waiting to be developed. When the Beatles collapsed, he was ready. On his 27th birthday, he stepped into EMI Studios to begin recording All Things Must Pass, a triple album bursting with creativity, spiritual reflection, and musical ambition. Its success confirmed what many had suspected for years. He had always been a great songwriter, he had just needed the room to prove it. Freed from the constraints of the band, he spent the next 3 decades writing and collaborating at an astonishing rate. He organized the Concert for Bangladesh, worked with an endless list of musicians, set up handmade films, and became a crucial figure in bridging rock and Eastern philosophy. His generosity as an artist became just as evident as his talent. He wrote for others as easily as he wrote for himself, gifting songs to friends, bandmates, and rising stars who could bring something fresh to his compositions. While his name may not always have been attached to these songs in the public consciousness, his influence was undeniable. One of the earliest instances of this came in 1968 with Sour Milk Sea, a track written during the Beatles' stay in Rishikesh. Harrison, along with the rest of the band, had travelled to India to study transcendental meditation under the guidance of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. That period was one of intense creative inspiration, producing dozens of songs that would later appear on the White Album and beyond. Sour Milk Sea was among them, but rather than keeping it for himself, he handed it to Jackie Lomax, a Liverpool-born singer signed to Apple Records. Lomax delivered a gritty vocal that gave the song a rougher edge than it might have had in Harrison's own hands. The lyrics were steeped in the philosophy he had been absorbing in Rishikesh. "It's got to be something else," Lomax sang, capturing the idea of moving beyond material distractions towards something deeper. Harrison produced the track, bringing in an all-star lineup featuring Paul McCartney on bass, Ringo Starr on drums, Eric Clapton on guitar, and Nicky Hopkins on piano. Despite its pedigree, the song failed to gain commercial traction, but it remained a fascinating insight into Harrison's mindset at the time. A songwriter no longer bound by traditional rock and pop conventions, exploring music as a means of self-discovery. That same year, he returned a favour to Eric Clapton, who had delivered the iconic guitar solo on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Their friendship had been growing, and Harrison co-wrote Badge, a track for Cream's final album, Goodbye. The origins of the title were suitably absurd. Clapton misread Harrison's handwriting, mistaking Bridge for Badge, and the name stuck. Ringo Starr then walked in drunk and gave him the line about the swans living in the park. Though the song was officially credited to Clapton and Harrison, it bore unmistakable traces of Harrison's influence. The chord progressions, the dreamy middle section, and the understated melancholy running beneath the track all pointed back to his touch. His work with Clapton would continue long after Cream dissolved. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, they maintained a close, if complicated, relationship, their personal lives becoming entangled when Clapton fell in love with Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. Even after that saga played out, their musical connection endured. In 1989, Harrison wrote Run So Far for Clapton's Journeyman album, a track that perfectly suited the blues-infused rock Clapton was embracing at the time.
One-way street can only run so far.
Another song, That Kind of Woman, was originally intended for Clapton as well, but instead it found its way into the hands of Gary Moore, whose grittier approach gave it a different energy. Between these collaborations, Harrison continued writing for artists across the spectrum. In 1971, after being immersed the previous year in the creation of All Things Must Pass, one of the songs that didn't make it onto the album, Try Some Buy Some, he gave to Ronnie Spector, wife of the legendary, later to be infamous, producer Phil Spector.
My life, seen gray sky, met big fries, seen them die to get high. Whoa.
The track was an unusual choice for her. Rather than the soaring romantic melodies that had defined her work with the Ronettes, this was a heavy, introspective piece, wrestling with themes of disillusionment and spiritual awakening. I'd had enough of all this, the lyrics declared, marking a stark contrast to the glamorous world of 60s pop that Ronnie had once embodied. Phil Spector threw everything at the production, layering strings, horns, and his signature wall of sound, but the song never quite found its audience. Years later, Harrison reclaimed it, including his own version on Living in the Material World. David Bowie also recognized its brilliance, covering it on his 2003 album Reality.
I love this song so much. I hope I do it justice tonight. This one is written by George Harrison. It's called Try Some, Buy Some.
Proving that even Harrison's lesser-known compositions had a way of resonating across generations. His generosity extended to his former bandmates as well, particularly Ringo Starr. Harrison had always maintained a close bond with Starr, and throughout the 1970s, he frequently provided songs and production support for his albums. One of the standout moments came in 1973 with Sunshine Life for Me, Sail Away Raymond, written for Starr's Ringo album.
It's sunshine light for me, if I could get away from this cloud.
Inspired by a trip to Ireland with Pattie Boyd, the track carried a folk-inspired charm that played to Starr's strengths as a vocalist. Harrison's involvement in Ringo didn't stop there. He co-wrote Photograph, which became one of Starr's biggest solo hits, and helped shape the album into a star-studded affair, featuring contributions from Lennon and McCartney as well. The record was a rare moment of Beatles camaraderie after their split, and Harrison played a crucial role in making it happen. He continued writing for Starr in later years, offering I Still Love You for Ringo's Rotogravure, a song originally intended for Shirley Bassey. Even as the 90s approached and Harrison withdrew from the spotlight, his songwriting didn't stop. In 2001, just weeks before his death, he recorded one final track, Horse to the Water, with Jools Holland's rhythm and blues orchestra. Written with his son Dhani, the song was a sly, knowing farewell, full of the dry humour that had always been part of his personality. His voice, though weathered, was still unmistakable, carrying the weight of a life spent searching, questioning, and creating. For a man who had spent much of his career battling for recognition, there was never any bitterness in the way he shared his work. He gave songs away without hesitation, understanding that music wasn't something to be hoarded, but something to be passed on, reinterpreted, and kept alive by those who could bring new meaning to it. Whether it was a track for a friend, a fellow musician, or an artist looking for their breakthrough, Harrison approached songwriting with the same quiet generosity that defined him. His legacy isn't just in the songs that bear his name, but in the ones that slipped through the cracks, carried forward by voices that might never have been heard without him.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. See you soon.